Hi guys, DevilHunterXYZ, and I know it's been quite some time. I decided it was time for me to go back to do another movie review, and recently I just saw Terminator Dark Fate, and what I can say about this movie is it does open up for new possibilities, probably like even a new series, but I mean that's just me jumping the gun at that point, but let's just take a look and see how this movie turns out. Okay, so for the basic summary that I can probably come up with here. Um, well, the movie starts out apparently 3 years after the events of Terminator 2. Mind you, this takes place after the second movie, so ignoring the other movies, Terminator 3 and onward, those are not no longer exist. So just forget about those. But anyway, taking place 3 years after Terminator 2. Apparently, John and Sarah are just trying to live out their lives after successfully destroying Cyberdyne, stopping Skynet, preventing Judgment Day from ever happening. And yeah, 3 years later, they've been trying to live their life, but then all of a sudden, they found that a Terminator, that other Terminators have been coming and going throughout the time, and apparently one of them manages to catch up to the Connors and ends up successfully terminating John. As crazy as that is, yes, John Connor actually dies in the beginning of the movie, or even before the events, technically. Um, yeah, so afterwards, it jumps ahead 22 years later, and apparently, at this point in Mexico City, a new Terminator arrives, known as the Rev 9, and his mission is to kill a person named Daniela Ramos, or Danny for short. And along that same time, another uh, person ends up coming from the future to the past to protect Danny, and she's known as Grace, essentially a human who's been cybernetically enhanced, given enhanced speed and power, kind of almost becoming like a Terminator herself. And yeah, so he and they both end up trying to track down Danny, which they do find her in a machine complex along with her brother, and of course it kind of goes on to a whole all-out brawl at the facility, and at the same time, Grace, Danny, and her brother end up escaping throughout the highway, and of course the Rev 9 continuously chases after them, eventually landing onto ending the conflict on a bridge. And at that point, that's when Sarah Connor ends up going up and tries to take down the Rev 9, buying them some time so that they can escape. Well, so after escaping from the Rev 9 for the time being, they ended up camping out in a hotel, and that's kind of when they laid some backstory that after John's death, Sarah's purpose in life, she had no purpose really at that point. She just figured the only thing she has now is just to kill any remaining Terminators. And at that point, she ends up getting encrypted messages from someone who apparently knows about these Terminators that are coming back from the future. So she's been going to each one of them and killing them. And then at the same time, we kind of get a little bit of backstory about Grace, and that she was a soldier fighting in the war in the future. And then she volunteered to be uh, transformed, augmented, becoming a Terminator herself, essentially. Uh, but also along those lines, you find out that the events with T2 actually did happen, and that Skynet is no longer, there's no more Skynet. Judgment Day stopped. Apparently, Grace, she doesn't know anything about John Connor or Sarah Connor, or the existence of Skynet, so those no longer exist. But instead we have another AI known as Legion, that's kind of more or less the same as Skynet. Just started out as an advanced AI created by the humans, but eventually became self-aware and started going against the humans themselves, so that it kind of breaks out into a war in the future. And along those lines, um, they figured that the best option was to try to track down the person who's been sending Sarah the encrypted messages, because because also Grace finds out that the encrypted messages that Sarah has was also the same location that she was order to go as well. So, and it ended up being in Laredo, Texas. Well, so after uh, trying to make their way to Laredo, Texas, trying to get through border control, they do end up getting captured, and then kind of goes into another all-out brawl as the Rev 9 manages to catch up to them at the facility there. But luckily, the group manages to escape. They eventually made it to Laredo, Texas, and they encounter the person who ends up sending those encrypted messages, and it turned out to be the same T-800 who killed John Connor all those years ago. And of course, he goes by the name Carl for I really don't know what. He basically becomes a family man since he has no purpose after successfully, killing John. His mission was done, so he was no purpose for him to exist at that point. So he decides to live out life, try to understand what it means to be a human for the most part. And then afterwards, they end up just trying to train Danny, for the upcoming fight because they were going to take down the Rev 9, kind of use like Danny as bait, more or less. Afterwards, they try to acquire an EMP device, as they see as the best option to try to take down the Rev 9, which they did, and like an outskirts of nowhere, really. So they managed to get their hands on the EMP from a soldier. Of course, it kind of goes into like another all-out brawl. They eventually escape on a cargo plane, and they're trying to escape from the Rev 9 for the time being to try to think of a plan to try to set off the EMP for the Rev 9. And at that point, it's revealed more that Grace was actually saved in the future by Danny, as Danny actually becomes the leader of that resistance that fights against Legion. So in a way, it's like Danny is like the new John Connor per se, and apparently Carl and Sarah were kind of destined to meet each other once again to protect Danny. Of course, as time passes, the Rev 9 eventually catches up to them on the cargo plane, like flying its own plane. It crashes into into their plane, and of course, they ended up crash landing near a hydro dam. They ended up crash landing into a hydro power plant, and at that point, they ended up going to like a final fight. The whole group trying to take down the Rev 9, which they do successfully, as the T-100 eventually traps it into like a turbine, mostly destroying it. Unfortunately, at that point, everyone's pretty much knocked out, and Grace was pretty much beaten up pretty badly at that point, and as like a sacrifice, she tells Danny to use her power source as the only EMP, as the previous EMP that they had was unfortunately destroyed during the shootout. She wanted Danny to use her power source as a way to destroy the Rev 9, sacrificing herself, which she ends up doing eventually. And at the same time, the T-100 barely surviving the turbine explosion ends up sacrificing itself as well to try to take down the Rev 9 along with it. And at the end of it, the Rev 9 is completely destroyed. And afterwards, you do see Sarah and Danny later on, like some time has passed. They do meet up with Grace as a young kid during their timeline, and of course, Danny vows that she was not gonna let Grace do the same thing again, have her sacrifice herself. So at that point, they end up driving off, just preparing themselves for the future, more or less. Well, for the good, one thing I can say immediately is I do like the fact they brought back Linda Hamilton and Arnold Schwarzenegger to reprise their roles once again. It's almost like they never left, really. I'm granted, yes, they are old, and it's kind of been addressed by that, but it's kind of hard to imagine them. It's kind of hard to imagine a Terminator movie without those characters. I mean, Sarah Connor and the T-100, those are just been iconic characters. It's kind of hard to imagine without them. But along with that, though, the new actors, though, Mackenzie Davis and Natalia Reyes, they did pretty decent jobs too. Kind of almost like setting up for the fact this is like somewhat of a reboot, kind of almost branching out to a new possible series. And you know what? Even the new Terminator, the Rev 9, what was it? Gabriel Luna. Yeah, I think he even did a decent job too. I mean, at times he acted pretty human. And I guess kind of goes to show that how advanced I guess maybe the Legion's Terminators were compared to Skynet's Terminators. But he acted human, tried to make friendly talk, try to actually blend in more with the humans, and I kind of actually think it was a pretty good job at that as well. The second I would probably say for the good, over the top action, like always, but probably even more so. I thought maybe Salvation was over the top in its action scenes, considering we're kind of getting glimpses of the actual war itself. But this movie kind of, I say, it takes it over the top. I mean, you have like the battle at the you had the battle over at the mechanical parts place at the beginning, the highway stuff. Then you had the fight over at the border patrol. Then you had the fight in the air with the two planes, and then of course you had the final fight at the hydro dam. So I mean, it kind of branches out dramatically into like into so many great fights. I can say that. It's like a lot of over the top action. And well, I say for the third good thing, I would say in a kind of more of an overall thing, I do like the fact that kind of more or less passing the torch along. As back then Terminator, how it was a Terminator sent back in time to try to kill Sarah Connor to prevent the birth of John Connor, the leader of the Resistance. And more or less this movie kind of dabbles in that same thing. I mean, you'll notice that there's actually a lot of references to they like to pay a little homage to the first and second movies, and it's kind of almost like branching out into a similar concept at that point, as she's like the new John Connor. She's supposed to be the leader of the new resistance that's supposed to fight against Legion, and that of course Sarah was there to kind of help with that, kind of help prepare for that, almost like passing on the torch more or less, kind of almost still keeping John Connor's legacy alive more or less, and passing on the torch to the future resistance that's gonna probably inevitably happen. As I mean, who knows, it's a possibility that we're gonna be getting into like a new series altogether of Terminator. Okay, so for the bad, I guess immediately what I could say is a lot of this is kind of more objective from my side, but right off the bat, I would say the death of John Connor is a bad thing. I just find it so odd that they ended up killing off John Connor in the beginning of this movie, and I mean, like, he barely has. I mean, he only gets slightly mentioned throughout the entire film, but I mean, it's just the idea of the future leader of the resistance. I mean, the guy who's kind of been praising as the Messiah, essentially, kind of the humanity's hope, humanity's savior throughout the last movies. Yeah, I mean, even including the non-existent movies that were going to come afterwards. T3, Salvation, and Genesis. I just find it strange. They just kind of just took him out of the movie, or took him out of the whole timeline. Essentially, it's almost like John Connor doesn't even matter anymore. Which, I mean, I don't really know about that. I mean, he's kind of been like the focal point throughout the entire series, the entire franchise, really, and just to take him out, it just kind of like a slap to the face across the Terminator fans, honestly. I mean, I kind of feel like they could have worked out better in a way for maybe John for not appearing in the movie in for some fashion. I mean, I would like to see something. I would have liked to see something like that, except him just being straight up killed off as if nothing has ever happened. I mean, I guess the idea was that I guess really the idea is that since Skynet no longer exists, Judgment Day is stopped. I guess John Connor is just no longer important at this point. I mean, since now that Danny becomes like the new John Connor for their upcoming future fight. But it's just strange to see the legacy just die out like that, honestly. The second thing I would probably say is, guess what? Another big thing is just the movie creates like a lot of unanswered questions, and possibly a little bit of plot holes throughout this entire movie. But I think really for me, it's just more the unanswered questions, and the fact that I mean, I could probably make like a whole separate video just talking about this, but I mean stuff like if they did successfully stop Skynet, back in T2, what was the point of still killing John Connor now? Like, what was the point of still sending the Terminators now to kill John Connor? I mean, unless they weren't aware of the fact that Skynet no longer existed, that Judgment Day had been completely stopped, or maybe the Terminators knew that there was a Plan B that Sarah didn't know. It just wasn't. I'm still kind of baffled by that. Um, of course, another thing is like what is Legion really? Like we don't get any backstory much on what Legion is. We get like a slight description that it was an AI system created by the humans, but I mean for like what purpose? Like why did it turn against them like Skynet did? I mean how is it even related to Skynet in any way? That's kind of what my question is with that one. Um I guess others things would be like why how in the world could the T-800 develop a conscience as I mean it's a T-800. I mean we've seen the T-800s numerous times. We never see that ever happen that it developed a conscience. I mean after it terminated John, there was no purpose for it anymore, so it tries to live a life as a human. And honestly I just don't quite understand that because how could it understand being a human, understand what Sarah had gone through? As I mean, I would probably have bought it if it was reprogrammed like it did back in T2, but it wasn't. It just fulfilled its mission, so that's I'm a little bit baffled in that. And of course, another question is why exactly only send the one Terminator like before, like Skynet's same mistake? Why only send the one Terminator to try to kill the person that was going to be the future leader of the Resistance? That Resistance, Danny. Why only send one? Like, why not send a whole bunch? Like they did with when they tried to kill John, essentially. So I don't know why they couldn't do that same work again, but maybe I was just diving too deep into that. I mean, it's just it creates like a lot of unanswered questions. Honestly, it kind of makes you wonder if they were gonna actually ever uh, explain more of this, and if they're gonna be planning on doing another series based on this type of Terminator setup. I don't know. Uh, I mean, we kind of had. I mean, the fortunate thing is they were kind of going somewhere into that when Genesis, when they were trying to make that into like a new trilogy on its own. But of course, that one movie failed pretty badly. Here, I don't know. It seems like they're trying to set it up the same way again, to trying to create like a new trilogy or whatever, trying to maybe explain more of this timeline of this series of events. Well, and then the third point I would probably say for the bad is it's kind of a slight nitpick for me, but the fact that they try to add humorous elements to this movie, and kind of like this, not as stupidly comedic moments like they did with Terminator 3, with the him with the star glasses shades, or going up to the stripper and asking him for his clothes and stuff like that. I mean, it's not where it's near as that, but it's just the fact make they're trying to make the T-800 funny in a weird way. For one thing, have him being called Carl, and he works with drapery, and the fact he tries to be a human tries to act like a human. It kind of gets a little bit weird, honestly. As I still just don't see the T-800 being a machine, trying to be funny though. For one thing, and then along those lines, you have the other characters trying to have some comedic moments themselves, trying to act badass in a way, but honestly, it kind of gets a little cringy at times. Honestly, I kind of wish they would just stuck to just being straight up action, kind of like how it was in T1 or T2. Just ignore the funny elements. This doesn't have to be like a comedy. I'm just saying. Well, overall, with Terminator Dark Fate, I would have to say, I mean, it was a different change. I can say that. I wouldn't say I hated the movie. Uh, I'm just kind of more skeptical on what the future of this movie is really gonna hold, or if it's even gonna hold anyway in the future. Because unfortunately, I think for what I've been hearing is that this movie hasn't been doing too well. Um, I mean, I kind of did like the movie, but I'm just kind of wondering if they really are going to continue with like a trilogy on this, kind of like what they planned were kind of like what they were going to plan to do with Genesis, but I mean that kind of flopped, like I said. But I mean, I do like the fact that they were trying to pass down the torch of the Terminator series to a new cast. I mean, I do like that. Maybe have even the old cast still reappear. That'd be nice. Kind of almost like a new generation of a Terminator, kind of like having the future series of Star Wars become like the new generation right there. And so, I mean, I wouldn't mind that, but it's just kind of hard to really fathom your head around the fact that all these new changes are going to get time. It's going to take some time to get used to these new changes, really. Um, but like I said, some good elements, some bad elements in this movie, but overall, giving it a final score, I would have to say, like, I'd barely a 7 out of 10 from me, honestly. I still don't say it's anywhere near as good as the first two movies, but I would probably say it's better than 3, better than Genesis just by slightly. Probably around the same ballpark as around Salvation, in my opinion. Uh, I mean, if they had explained more things, if they kind of opened up, if they explained more things, where they kind of opened up for like the new future, if they talked about that more, maybe address some kind of inconsistencies with the timeline or how the old timeline would affect the new timeline. It's just a little bit odd, honestly. It's kind of having time travel itself just being a central focal point in the series itself. It's what kind of creates this mess to begin with. And I mean, if they could work a story around that, that'd be nice. If they can further explain this Legion, the new war, the new resistance, again, that would be nice too. But I mean, we just have to wait and see what, if any, future installments this new Terminator is gonna hold out, or see what's gonna happen. Well, overall though, I still think I would recommend it. I would recommend this movie. I mean, it kind of a little bit of a nostalgia trip, way, seeing some of the old actors. So I mean, I wouldn't mind that. And yeah, like I said, go out there, see it. Who knows? Maybe you might get a kick out of it. All right, guys, this is DevilHunterXYZ, and until next time.